It had been months since I last heard my mother's voice in anything resembling warmth. So when she called on a Tuesday evening, saying she wanted to have me over for dinner, I didn't know what to feel. "I'll make your favorite lasagna," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "And your father will pick up cheesecake from that bakery you like." Caught me off guard. For years our conversations had been clipped, practical, rarely dipping into anything personal. This felt different, and against my better judgment I let myself think it might mean something. I marked the date in my calendar, then spent the rest of the week doing what I always did when it came to them, preparing in ways they would never notice. I doubled my allergy medication just in case. I picked out a new dress I thought my mother would approve of, understated but neat the way she liked. I even bought a good bottle of wine, something I couldn't really afford but wanted to bring. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about trying once again to bridge the gap between us. By Saturday evening I was ready before the sun went down. The drive to my parents' house was familiar, the same 30 miles I'd driven countless times before, but it felt heavier that night. I kept telling myself not to expect too much, to just take the evening as it came. When I pulled into their driveway, the porch light was already on. My mother opened the door with a smile, pulling me into a hug that felt practiced but still carried a trace of warmth. The smell of lasagna drifted out from the kitchen, rich and comforting. For a moment I thought maybe this would be different. Then I heard the bark. It was sharp, close, and unmistakable. My chest tightened before I even saw him. The big white dog bounding in from the living room, fur catching the light. "Is Victoria's dog here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Of course," my mother said, like it was obvious. "This is his home. Victoria brought him over this morning. She's staying the weekend." The hope I'd carried all week thinned in an instant. "Mom, you know I'm severely allergic," I reminded her, keeping my voice calm. "You'll be fine for one evening," she said, turning back toward the kitchen. "Take another pill if you need to." My father appeared in the doorway, grinning like nothing was wrong. "There's my girl. Dinner's almost ready." I hesitated, then stepped inside. I'd come all this way. Leaving now would only feed the idea that I was difficult, impossible to please. Victoria was curled on the couch with the dog sprawled across her lap. She looked up from her phone just long enough to smile. "Hey sis, look how big Snowball's gotten." She buried her face in his fur, completely unaware of the way my throat was already tightening. I kept my distance, trying to breathe shallowly. "He's certainly fluffy," I said, forcing a small smile. We sat down for dinner soon after. My plate was full, the lasagna exactly as I remembered it, but the conversation swirled in the same predictable circle. Snowball's new tricks. Snowball's food preferences. The organic treats they'd ordered. I tried to join in, mentioning my recent promotion, the night classes I'd started, but my words landed and disappeared. My mother nodded politely before turning back to Victoria's updates. By the time dessert was served, my skin had started to prickle. Hives rose across my arms, my sinuses thickened, and each breath felt just a little shallower than the last. Victoria glanced at me for the first time all evening. "Whoa, you look terrible. Are you having a reaction or something?" "Yes," I said quietly. "To Snowball. I told Mom when I got here." My mother frowned. "I thought you were exaggerating. You've always been a bit dramatic about your health issues." "I'm not being dramatic," I said, the effort of speaking making me feel more breathless. "My doctors warned me about prolonged exposure." "Well, you seemed fine enough to eat dinner," my father said, as if that settled it. I pushed my chair back. "I think I should go. Thank you for dinner, but I'm not feeling well." "You're leaving before coffee?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I wanted to show you the new curtains." "Another time," I said, gathering my things. Victoria rolled her eyes. "It's just a little allergic reaction. Pop a Benadryl and chill out." I didn't respond. I walked to the door, thanked them again, and stepped into the cold night air. My breathing was heavier now, my head light. The drive home felt longer than usual. I stopped at a pharmacy halfway, bought extra antihistamines, and took them in the parking lot. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drained, physically from the reaction, emotionally from the reminder that nothing had changed. That night, as I used my nebulizer and waited for my breathing to settle, I told myself what I always did after moments like this. They didn't mean to hurt me. They just didn't understand. But a smaller, quieter voice inside me said something else. They understood. They just didn't care enough to do anything different. I turned off the light, lay in the dark and tried to ignore that voice. But it stayed with me, steady and certain in the quiet hours that followed. Snowball sat in Victoria's lap as if the room existed for him alone. His fur floated into the air, catching the light, invisible until it landed against the dark fabric of my dress. My chest felt tight almost immediately, but I kept my smile where it was. Old habits. The conversation started light, or what passed for light in my family. My father asked Victoria about the dog's training. My mother wanted to know if the special food they'd ordered was working. Victoria laughed, talking about organic salmon kibble as though she'd discovered something life-changing. I cleared my throat and tried to join in. Work's been busy. I just finished leading a project. That reminds me, my mother cut in, turning back to Victoria. Did you call the groomer about Snowball's appointment next week? I did, Victoria said, scratching behind his ears. They're going to give him the oatmeal bath again. It's so good for his skin. The itch along my jaw spread downward, heat blooming under my skin. I reached for my water and drank slowly, trying to keep my breathing even. For a while I sat quietly, nodding at the right moments. My fork pushed food across my plate. I could taste the lasagna, but faintly, as though something in me had already disconnected from the meal. When my father asked about Snowball's tricks, Victoria leaned forward, animated. He knows, sit and stay now. Oh, and he learned to high-five. I tried again. I've also started night classes. It's been. That's adorable, my mother said to Victoria, her eyes bright. We should record him and send it to Aunt Linda. The words I had prepared, the stories I thought I'd share, drifted away. It was like speaking into a wind that carried everything straight past them. The dog sneezed, a little spray of dander into the air, and I felt my throat tighten further. My skin burned, the beginnings of hives raising on my wrists where they brushed against the table. So I said nothing. At one point I excused myself to the bathroom. In the mirror my reflection looked strained, cheeks flushed, eyes watering, the rash along my neck starting to show. I leaned against the counter and took a slow breath. You can make it through the evening, I told myself quietly. Just a couple more hours. When I returned, the plates had been cleared. My mother brought out dessert, her hands careful around the cheesecake box. We got your favorite, she said, but it was said like a fact, not a gesture. I forced a small smile. Thank you. The conversation didn't change. More stories about Snowball's vet visits, his favorite toys, how strangers stopped them on walks to admire him. I ate my slice in silence, each bite harder to swallow as the congestion set in. By the end of dessert, my arms were mottled red. My breathing was shallow. I dabbed at my nose with a napkin, hoping it would hide how much I was struggling. Victoria finally looked at me. Wow, you look kind of bad. Allergies. Yes, I said, my voice hoarse. To Snowball. I mentioned it earlier. My mother frowned slightly. I didn't think it was that serious. You've always been a little dramatic about your allergies. I'm not being dramatic, I said, keeping my tone even. My doctors warned me about prolonged exposure. Well, you seemed fine enough to have dinner, my father said, like it proved something. I put my fork down. I think I should go. Thank you for dinner, but I'm not feeling well. You're leaving before coffee? My mother asked. I wanted to show you the new curtains. Another time, I said, standing. Victoria rolled her eyes. You're always so serious about everything. Just take a pill and relax. I didn't reply. My bag was already on my shoulder. The cold air outside hit me like relief. I drew in a shallow breath, my lungs still restricted but grateful for the distance. Driving home I replayed the night. The way I'd been almost invisible at that table. The way my health had been dismissed in the same casual tone they used for talking about curtain fabric. I stopped at a pharmacy on the way back, bought more antihistamines and took them in the parking lot under the yellow glow of a street lamp. The pill stuck in my throat, but I swallowed it down. By the time I reached my apartment, my chest still felt heavy. I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes and went straight to the nebulizer. The steady hum filled the silence of my living room as the medicine worked its way into my lungs. Sitting there, I thought about what I'd told myself in the bathroom, that I could make it through the evening. I had. But at what cost? It wasn't just the reaction, the hives, the shortness of breath. It was the reminder that in some rooms, you can disappear without ever leaving. I turned off the machine, my breathing a little easier. In the quiet, the thought came back sharper this time. Rooms that choose not to see you will never choose to keep you safe. By the third morning after that dinner, I woke with the weight of something pressing hard against my chest. My skin burned in patches, and when I stood, the room tilted. I had told myself it was just a flare, that the medication would settle it, but the symptoms hadn't eased, they'd deepened. I still got dressed for work. Years of pushing through had trained me to move forward no matter how my body protested. I had an important presentation that morning, one I'd been preparing for weeks. Missing it felt like failure. The drive to the office blurred past. By the time I reached my desk, my breathing was shallow and quick. Natalie, who sat 2 rows away, spotted me immediately. "Sophia, you look awful," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Allergic reaction," I managed. "Still hanging on from the weekend." She frowned. "You need to see a doctor." "I'll call after the presentation." "No," she said firmly. "You should go now." I waved her off and opened my laptop, but even that small movement made dark spots flicker in my vision. Still, I told myself to hold on. After half an hour, I called my doctor's office from a quiet corner. The nurse listened, then said, "You need to get to the emergency room immediately. With your history, this could turn into anaphylaxis." Her words cracked something in me. I'd heard them before years ago during other health crises. I remembered being 17, hospitalized for 3 days, my parents visiting once. I remembered college, when pneumonia kept me in bed for a week and they sent money but stayed away because Victoria was going through a breakup. I ended the call and stood still for a moment, holding onto the edge of the desk. The air felt too thin. Natalie came over again. "What did they say?" "They said I should go to the ER." "I'm taking you," she said, grabbing her bag before I could argue. In the car, I called my parents. The call went to voicemail. I left a short message. "I'm having a severe reaction. Going to the hospital now." I kept my voice steady, as if steadiness would make them take it seriously. Then I tried Victoria. She answered with the sound of Snowball barking in the background. "I can't reach Mom and Dad," I said. "Can you let them know I'm heading to the ER? It's bad." "Okay," she said distractedly. "Snowball, stop. Sorry, he's chewing my shoe. I'll text them when I can." "Victoria, I need them to know now." "Right. I'll tell them. Feel better, okay?" She hung up before I could say more. I leaned back against the seat, fighting the rising panic. Natalie glanced over. "Family." "Something like that," I said. At the hospital, the triage nurse took one look at me and called for a wheelchair. I was wheeled into a treatment room, hooked up to monitors, given injections I barely registered. The world narrowed to a series of sounds. Beeping machines, voices calling numbers, the rustle of gloves. I remember a nurse's hand on mine. "You hang in there, sweetheart," she said. I squeezed back weakly, grateful for her presence. Later, I learned the hospital had finally reached my parents 4 hours after I was admitted. A nurse told me their response. When urged to come immediately because it could be my last night, my father had said they couldn't. They had to pick up Victoria from the dog park. My mother added that they'd come tomorrow if I was still there. Hearing that stripped away the last remnants of denial. I had always believed that in a true emergency they'd show up. That belief dissolved in that hospital bed. I faded in and out through the night, my body locked in a battle I couldn't fully feel but knew could end badly. Friends from work came by, some just to sit quietly beside me. Natalie stayed until the nurses insisted she go home. Not once did my parents appear. The next morning, I opened my eyes to a white ceiling and the soft beeping of the monitor. A younger nurse noticed I was awake. "Welcome back," she said gently. "Bye, parents?" I asked. Her smile faltered. "They haven't been in yet. Would you like me to call them?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No. Don't." Something inside me had shifted. The need for them to prove their love, the hope that had kept me reaching toward them my whole life. It felt quieter now. Not gone, but muted, like the sound of a closing door. I lay there, listening to the steady rhythm of the machines. For the first time, I wasn't planning how to win them over. I was wondering how to let them go. The ICU blurred into a sequence of cold mornings and dim nights. Nurses adjusted my medications, checked my vitals, and spoke to me in soft voices. Friends stopped by in rotating shifts, bringing flowers, magazines, or just their company. The people who owed me nothing were the ones showing up. I kept waiting for my parents. Even when I told myself I didn't care, a part of me still thought they might walk through the door. But the days passed and they didn't. It was on the third day that I asked a nurse named Ellie for paper and a pen. She didn't ask why, just brought them along with a lap desk so I could write without straining. At first the words came slow. I wasn't sure how to start something that had been building my entire life. But then the sentences began to take shape. I wrote about the dinner. About the way my health was dismissed as if it were an inconvenience rather than a reality. I wrote about the choice they made that night, how it was the clearest example of a pattern that had always been there. Victoria's wants over my needs no matter the cost. I went back further. To the school competitions they skipped. The milestones that passed without them there. The hospital stays where their absence was explained away by something happening in Victoria's life. I didn't write to convince them anymore. That need was gone. I wrote so there would be a record in my own words of what I could no longer accept. I am stepping back, I wrote in the middle of the third page. Not to punish you but to protect myself. I can't keep showing up for people who will not show up for me. If you ever want a relationship again, it will have to be built on respect and equal care. I don't know if that day will come. But until then I need distance. Ellie walked in as I was finishing the last paragraph. That looks like important work, she said gently. It is, I told her. It's the last thing I'll say to them for a while. By the sixth day I had recovered enough to be discharged. My breathing was steady, the rash fading, though my body still felt like it had been hollowed out. Natalie offered to pick me up and I accepted without hesitation. Before leaving I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote my name on the front. I handed it to Ellie. They said they're coming this afternoon, I explained. Could you leave this on the bed after I'm gone? I want them to find it. She studied my face for a moment then nodded. I can do that. Natalie arrived just before noon. I signed the discharge papers, gathered the small pile of things I'd kept at the bedside, and walked out without looking back. We went to a coffee shop across the street. From our table by the window I could see the hospital entrance. At 3:15 they appeared, my mother's coat buttoned all the way up, my father's hands shoved in his pockets. They walked inside without any urgency. I didn't stay to watch what happened when they reached the room. I didn't need to. The letter was there and for once the weight of explaining myself had been lifted. That evening in Natalie's apartment, I felt a strange stillness. I didn't know if the letter would make them angry or defensive or sad. But I knew it told the truth. And I knew that telling it was a turning point I couldn't walk back from. Natalie made tea and set a mug in front of me. How do you feel? She asked. Like I've closed a door, I said. And I'm not rushing to open it again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, like setting down a heavy bag after carrying it too far. The days that followed were an adjustment. My body needed rest, but so did my mind. The silence from my parents was louder than I expected, but not in the way it used to be. It no longer pulled at me. It confirmed what I had written, that without my effort there was nothing coming back. 1 week later Ellie called. She said they'd come into the room, found the letter and read it together. My mother had sat down halfway through, pale and still. My father had crumpled the pages, then smoothed them out again. They'd stayed in that room for nearly an hour without saying much. When they left, my mother was crying. Do you want to know anything else? Ellie asked. No, I said. That's enough. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken. I just felt free. The letter hadn't changed who they were. But it had changed me. And that, I realized, was the only part one could ever control. The first week after leaving the letter felt like walking through a house where all the clocks had stopped. There was no call, no text, not even a half-hearted, hope you're feeling better. The silence had weight, but it wasn't the suffocating kind I used to feel when they ignored me. This was different. This was space. I stayed in Natalie's spare bedroom. It was quiet there. No television droning in the background, no slammed doors. She worked during the day and I spent most of that time resting, letting my body catch up to what it had been through. The stillness gave me room to notice things I'd ignored before. How often my thoughts used to circle around my parents, how much energy I'd spent rehearsing ways to get them to see me. On the 8th day my phone lit up with a voicemail from my mother. I didn't answer. Her voice was tight, controlled. Sophia, this is your mother. We got your letter. I think you're being very dramatic about this whole situation. Your father and I have always done our best for both you and Victoria. Call us when you're ready to be rational. I listened twice, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to be sure I'd heard every word the way it was intended. There was no acknowledgement of the hospital, no recognition of what I'd written. Just the same dismissal wrapped in a tone that suggested I was the problem. A few days later, an email came from my father. It was longer, measured. He admitted they should have come to the hospital, but insisted they didn't realize how serious it was. He wrote that they'd always been proud of my independence, as if that pride could stand in for presents. Near the end he said, "I hope you'll reconsider your decision to cut us off. Victoria misses you, and despite what you may believe, so do we." I forwarded the email to Lydia, the therapist Dr. Rivera had recommended. By then I'd had my first session with her, mostly talking about the hospital stay, the letter, and the years before it. She called my father's message partial acknowledgement, the kind people offer when they want to quiet the discomfort without touching the root of it. "Do you want to respond?" she asked in our second session. "I'm not sure," I said. "Part of me feels like replying just reopens the door." "It depends what you need," she said. "If you need space, silence is an answer. If you want to leave a thread, you can acknowledge what they did say without letting go of your boundaries." 2 days later, I sent a short reply. "Thank you for acknowledging that you should have come to the hospital. That means something to me. But this isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern that nearly cost me my life. I need time and space to heal both physically and emotionally. I hope you can respect that." I didn't get an answer. Victoria texted once. A casual, "How are you feeling?" that read more like an obligation than concern. I wrote back, "Recovering. Thanks." It was the bare minimum, and for the first time I didn't feel guilty about it. The following week I moved back into my own apartment. Mrs. Garza from next door had been feeding my cat while I was away. She brought over a container of soup that night and stayed to chat. "We look out for each other," she said simply. It was the kind of care that asked for nothing in return, and I realized how rare that had been in my life. At work, my colleagues welcomed me back without pressing for details. Brian, my supervisor, told me to ease into things. Natalie stopped by my desk the first day with coffee. These small acts began to fill spaces I hadn't realized were empty. Therapy became a steady part of my week. Lydia explained the golden child/scapegoat dynamic, how parents can project all their affirmation onto one child while treating the other as the resilient one who needs less. Hearing it named felt like someone had turned on a light in a room I'd been living in my whole life. "None of this was about you not being enough," she said. "In fact, it's often the opposite. Independence can feel like a threat to people who define themselves by being needed." That stayed with me. I'd been chasing their approval with achievements, thinking it would balance the scales. Now I understood the scales were never meant to be balanced. By the third week, the silence from my parents stopped feeling like a punishment. It began to feel like a boundary holding. I wasn't checking my phone every hour. I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head. I was living in my own days, deciding what to do with my own energy. One evening I made tea and sat by the window. The city lights stretched out below, each one a small reminder that the world was bigger than the four walls I used to measure myself against. I thought about the letter again, how it wasn't just for them but for me. Proof that I had finally said the thing I needed to say. I didn't know if they would ever understand it. I didn't know if understanding was even possible. But I knew this. The silence that followed had given me more than their words ever had. It had given me room to breathe. 2 months after leaving the hospital, I moved to a different city. It wasn't far, just 40 miles, but it felt like another life. My new apartment was on the top floor of a building with clean air, wide windows, and a lock I could turn without hesitation. The first night there, I sat on the floor between unopened boxes, listening to the quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't take anything from me. Work transferred me to a nearby branch, and the change was seamless. Brian had arranged it without me needing to push. "We want you where you can thrive," he'd said, and I believed him. It struck me how foreign it felt to have someone factor my well-being into a decision. Natalie visited every other weekend. We'd walk to the farmer's market, cook simple meals, and talk about everything except my parents. She never asked for updates unless I offered them, and even then she only listened. It was a kind of friendship I didn't know how much I needed, Steady, unhurried, without the constant pull to perform. Mrs. Garza called every Sunday. Sometimes we spoke for 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. She'd tell me about her garden or how my cat still came to her window in the afternoons like he owned the place. "He's a gentleman," she'd say, and I'd smile because I knew she was talking about more than the cat. She had a way of making me feel like I belonged somewhere without having to earn it. Victoria surprised me. A month after my move, she called out of the blue. "I rehomed Snowball," she said. "A family friend has a big yard and kids who love him." "That's unexpected," I said carefully. "I realized I didn't actually want a dog," she admitted. "I just wanted Mom and Dad's attention. And they gave it to me every time I asked for something. It wasn't fair to him. Or to you." Her voice sounded smaller, more uncertain than I remembered. "We started meeting for coffee once a month. The conversations were tentative at first, both of us feeling our way around years of imbalance. But there was honesty now, a fragile thread we were both holding. Therapy helped me see that my relationship with her could be separate from my relationship with our parents. Lydia reminded me that people can be shaped by the same environment in different ways. She benefited from the dynamic, but she didn't create it, she said. It's okay to set boundaries with your parents and still explore what's possible with your sister. I kept the boundaries firm with my parents. They called once a month. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I let it go to voicemail. The conversations, when they happened, were short and polite. No arguments, no deep dives, just surface-level updates. I had stopped expecting them to change, and in that acceptance there was freedom. I also stopped feeling guilty for building a life that didn't revolve around them. I joined a book club, started hiking with a group for people with chronic health conditions, and even took a weekend photography course. These weren't distractions. They were parts of a life I hadn't been able to claim before. One evening, after a club meeting, I walked home through the quiet streets of my new neighborhood. The air was cool and the light from the street lamps pooled in soft circles on the pavement. I thought about how far I'd come since the night at my parents' table when Snowball's fur floated through the air and I sat there, silent, shrinking in my own skin. Back then I thought surviving the evening was strength. Now I understood that walking away, even when it meant leaving behind people you once believed were essential, was its own kind of strength. The family I have now isn't made of shared DNA. It's made of people who show up. Natalie, who drove me to the ER without hesitation. Mrs. Garza, who fed my cat and brought soup to my door. Colleagues who covered for me without complaint. And slowly, maybe, a sister who was beginning to see the truth we both grew up in. The last time my parents called, I answered. My mother talked about the weather, my father mentioned a neighbor selling their house. Before we hung up, my mother said, "It would be nice to see you sometime." "I'll think about it," I said. And I meant it, not as a promise but as a choice I could make on my own terms. After the call, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city spread out in front of me, lights blinking on in the dusk. I thought about the letter still somewhere in their house, maybe folded away in a drawer, maybe thrown out. It didn't matter. That letter had been my turning point. It didn't change them, but it changed me. It was the moment I stopped being the one who always came back, who always tried again. It was the moment I claimed the air I needed to breathe. And here in this life I was building, the air was clear.